To ask commissioners to get back to their seats. Welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on November 7th, 2016. It's 7:05 p.m. due to our earlier work session. Could we have the roll, please?
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Sporhays?
Here.
Mr. Spinelli?
Here.
Ms. Bailey?
Here.
Ms. Barker?
Here.
Mr. Strike?
Here.
Mr. Kange has been excused. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to the minutes, could I have a motion on case 2016-0127 to move that to next week? Mr. Strike, moved by Mr. Strike, seconded by Mr. Sporhays. Any discussion? The land use plan map is continued to next Monday night. Thank you. On the minutes of September 9th, October 3rd, and October 17th, can I have a motion to adopt the minutes? Thank you, Mr. Strike, seconded by Mr. Walker. Any discussion on the minutes? Any discussion at all? Okay, hearing none, those minutes are adopted. Special order of business disclosures, Mr. Spring.
Yes, I wasn't at the meetings that pertain to resolutions D1B and D1C. And besides that, I don't have any.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Looks like we're still missing Miss Bailey will come back, but Mr. Strike.
Yes, in the matter of case 2016-0015 and 2016-0102 and 0147. I was not present, so I will not be voting.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
Yeah, in the case of 2016-0105, the applicant is a client of mine. I represent them on a nearby property, but I'll save you the time. I do not have a substantial part of the present action or one that varies directly or substantially with the outcome of this case. I don't have any immediate or known conjectural or dependent interests. I don't have any significant monetary benefit or, detriment depending on the outcome of the case. So there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any questions for Mr. Walker? Mr. Sporhays, you have a motion.
Direct Brandon to participate.
You have a second? Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Any discussion? Please vote. Mr. Walker, you are directed to participate on that case. Mr. Spinella, any disclosures? None. Ms. Barker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was absent for consideration of case number 2016-047 and the accompanying resolution on D1E, so I will not be voting on that item.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. Mr. Sporhays?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. On case D1B 2016-0066, I was absent and will not be voting on that case.
Do we have enough votes for all the resolutions? Okay. Thank you for the disclosures. I have none. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Thank you, Mr. Strike, seconded by Mr. Sporhays. Aside from those of you that are not voting on individual resolutions because of your attendance, anybody wishing to pull any items on the consent agenda? Hearing none, please vote on the consent agenda. Those resolutions are approved. Moving on to public hearings. We have 3 public hearings here this evening, 2 of which are code amendments by the Municipality of Anchorage. First is case 2016-0105, Providence Health Services request for rezone from R3 Mixed Residential District to RO Residential Office District, 3.93 acres located west of Piper Street, east of 42nd, east of Wright, and north of East Tudor Road. I will read the procedure by which the public may speak. After staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, I'll ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules of Procedure. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, 10 minutes, and part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives of groups such as community councils and PTAs, 5 minutes, and individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights related to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. All 3 items remaining on our agenda are recommendations to the Assembly. So with that, could we have the staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Providence Health Services is requesting to rezone this roughly 4-acre parcel from R3 Mixed Residential District to RO Residential Office District. This rezoning would allow for the future development of an outpatient medical office or assisted living facility. Should the rezone be approved, development is anticipated to occur in the next 3 to 5 years. The rezoning application has been reviewed against the 9 standards required to be met by AMC 2103-160E. I'll go through the 9 standards separately. Standard 1, this standard appears to be met. The proposed rezoning to RO will allow for development that is consistent with the UMED district plan. This property being identified in the UMED district plan as office low intensity provides an appropriate transition between residential areas north of Tudor and commercial development south of Tudor. Being a transition area between intense commercial uses and residential neighborhoods appears to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. Standard 2, this standard appears to be met. While this site is not identified in the 2001 Anchorage 2020 Land Use Policy Map, there are policies that appear to conform, that this rezone appears to conform to, specifically policy 4, 5, and 7. Standard number 3, this standard appears to be met. The RO district is intended to provide areas for professional, business, and medical service outpatient office uses, or areas with a compatible mix of office and residential uses. Providence Health Services would like to develop this property in the future with outpatient medical office and or assisted living facility. Therefore, that standard appears to be met. Standard 4, staff believes this standard is met. The general area contains a mix of commercial, office, and residential. The proposed zoning is consistent and compatible with those uses. The rezoning will provide a suitable transition between the residential and commercial developments already established in the area. Standard number 5, staff finds that this standard is met. The petition site is located within the Anchorage Roads and Drainage Service area and has access to Piper Street. Official Streets and Highways Plan identifies Piper Street as a collector roadway. Public utilities such as water, sewer, gas, and electric are available to this property, and the petition site is located within the police, fire, and building safety service areas. Standard number 6, staff finds this standard is met. Rezoning of the site is not anticipated to have any significant impacts to air, water, noise, stormwater management, wildlife, or vegetation. Future use of the property as a medical office or assisted living will have no negative impact on the natural environment. Standard number 7, staff finds this standard is met. No negative impacts are anticipated on surrounding properties from future development of this site. Standard number 8, staff finds this standard is met. The rezoning to RO is consistent with the surrounding land use patterns, which are residential and commercial. And standard number 9, staff finds that this standard is met. The rezoning will not create a split zone lot. Proposed rezoning to RO meets the approval criteria for zoning map amendments. This rezoning is consistent with the UMED plan adopted by the Anchorage Assembly in 2016, which identifies this property as office low intensity. And as such, staff recommends approval of this rezone from R3 to RO. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the Commission has. Thank you.
Thank you. Question from Mr. Spring.
Yes, I think, let's see, number 1 question in my mind is what the impact for this potential development would have on the surrounding traffic congestion.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I believe the traffic congestion will be evaluated with development. I think that's typically the way the traffic department requires it to be done. They may require a traffic impact analysis with the building permit, but I don't know that that's actually been evaluated at this time.
Well, this is a pretty big rezoning. It's almost 4 acres. If it's going to be changed from R3 to ROSL with up to 45-foot tall buildings, there could be a pretty substantial traffic impact. I'll give you an example where they asked for a traffic impact analysis prior to rezoning was just recently on Northwood Drive, where there was R3 to R4. There was those towers that were in there. And although they didn't finish the TIA, they were able to shed some light on the impacts, and it was probably the most critical issue on that rezoning. I'm kind of flying blind here because I don't have any clue as to what the intersection level of services are in the area. I am pretty sure, however, that Piper and Tudor has some real significant problems. If you drive there to go to work, right? All of you guys. Mm-hmm. You drive eastbound on Tudor, you see people lined up trying to turn left from Tudor to Piper in the morning to get to the Providence area, the huge buildings, and I think there's a cardiac center there. I think there's a left turn lane. I don't know how long the left turn lane is or how sufficient it is, but I bet you any money that it takes more than one traffic signal to get through there. It seems like we could at least have information regarding what the existing level of service is at that intersection, so we can make a decision. Once we make a decision on this, how do you go back on it? Say there's no solution to the problem with traffic at Tudor and Piper. Say there's not room to put in a double left turn lane, which is probable because unless you take out a through lane, I don't know how you do it. So you're asking us to make a decision regarding this, which may not really be in the best interest of that area and the traffic in that area.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I maybe pose the question to the petitioner's representative as to the level of analysis that's been done on this site and proposed development. And maybe the petitioner's representative can shed some light on that issue for you.
I have a second question. Title 21.04.030E3.B is regarding the zoning districts. And with respect to RO district, it states that where a new or enlarged RO district is adjacent to existing residential zoned areas, adequate area shall be provided for buffers or other site design requirements necessary to achieve compatibility. I don't see anything in the staff report regarding this. It does say, however, that there are single-family residential uses to the east and the west. What's your opinion? Is the existing setbacks that the RO provides adequate to provide buffering to achieve compatibility with surrounding?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, possibly. It really depends on the level of development that the petitioner is looking to achieve. I would suggest that if it is going to be an office use, such as an office building, then perhaps the existing setbacks, as stated in the RO, are not appropriate, and the commission could certainly recommend imposing a special limitation to create a larger buffer beyond that.
What are the setbacks?
I'll check the code here. Let me check, and I'll get right back to you.
I have a third question.
Yeah, I was just, while he's looking, if you could check the setbacks as well as the height of the surrounding zoning districts, that'd be great. The R2M and the R3.
That was going to be my next question regarding, you stated in the staff report that R3 and ROSL is basically the same as far as the impacts and setbacks, and when in fact I don't believe it is. The R3 has a 40% lot coverage, and the RO has a 50% lot coverage. And I would like also information regarding the height limitations and how that differs between the R3 and the RO.
Those are your questions? Any
That's
other-
my question.
Okay, we'll let you continue to look at that. Mr. Woodfield, you have those answers?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, the setback requirements in the RO district are 10 in the front, 5 on the side, 10 in the rear, as opposed to the R3, which are 20 in the front, 5 on the side, 10 in the rear. Max height of the structures, R3 district is 35 feet. RO district is 45 feet. So there is a difference there.
Just, this may not be relevant given what I've heard about their development plans, but isn't their RO district allow higher height limitations if it's residentially developed?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, yes, 2104-020H2D does allow for height increases, correct?
Up to 70 feet?
Correct.
70 feet?
Can I ask on the setback issue, is there a table in the code that dictates setback from one zoning to another? In other words, when RO is adjacent to another, is there any additional setback required?
It would be landscape buffering, not an actual building setback. The building setback is the same regardless. But you could impose landscaping buffer. You can impose a buffer landscaping when two incompatible uses, such as an office and a residential development, are directly adjacent to each other.
But in this case, then, depending on what the side or the rear setback is, this is either within a 5-foot or a 10-foot setback, which was what I believe you said were the setbacks in the RO district. So
Correct.
that never gets bigger, or in some instances, if there's buffer landscaping, you can't do that within 5 feet, I believe.
Through the chair, or to the chair, the landscape buffering that's associated between residential and adjacent more intense uses such as RO, I'm just looking that up, but I believe there's a requirement for buffer landscaping of a 15-foot buffer between adjacent residential and an office, more intense office use.
So this is assisted living. Would you consider that more intensive office use, or would you consider that residential to residential?
Mr. Chairman, let me take one look in here really quick. I believe it actually has to do with the actual zoning district abutting a separate zone.
That's what I thought too. Okay, that'd be great. And while you're looking that up, I have Ms. Bailey in the queue provided. Mr. Spring, you good? Okay, Ms. Bailey.
Through the chair, I was looking at page 12, and the Department of Transportation recommends 2 conditions for this, and I was wondering, were those conditions looked at, and why were they not incorporated in the staff recommendations?
Through the chair, Ms. Bailey, the petitioner has initiated a platting action on this property. These issues were addressed in the platting action, and we didn't want to duplicate something that's already been resolved. The DOT has already made these comments, made them with the plat, and just reiterated those comments with the rezoning. So they've already been addressed. We felt there was no need to address them again. And I think the petitioner's representative is amenable to resolving these as well. So.
Any follow-up, Ms. Bailey?
No.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Strike?
Yeah, can you elaborate further on the replatting? Because my initial question was going to be what replatting has taken place on these lots prior and what is currently in plan?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, essentially what they've done is eliminated the interior lot lines to make it one lot. They have preliminary approval on that, and it's essentially a reversion to acreage. So they've taken the interior lot lines, removed them, and made it all one lot.
Did this site used to be 3 lots, or was it even more?
I believe it was 3 lots.
Were all 3 lots
Correct.
zoned the same?
All zoned the same. This would not, the plat cannot create a split zone lot, so that was, it's all the zoning was consistent.
You good, Mr. Strike? I had a question, Mr. Whitfield. The sort of large tract directly to the north is zoned R3SL and references an AO from 8282. Can you tell me what that special limitation is on that tract?
Through the chair, I cannot. I don't have the special limitations on that. My apologies.
That's going to be, sorry for not asking you ahead of the meeting, but it's going to be an important one to me. I don't know if that, we'll ask the petitioner if they know, but, understanding what limitations that are, I mean, if we're asked to evaluate the impacts of this lot on another, it's important to know that. Okay, any other commissioners have questions for staff, or Terry, did you find the answer to?
I did find the answer, and it is a requirement of buffer landscaping between an RO zone and any adjacent residential other than R4.
Okay, and that buffer landscaping you believe is it's within 15 foot. Can you reduce that down if there's fencing?
You can reduce it to 10 feet with a fence.
To 10 feet, okay. Thank you. Any other questions for staff? With that, I'd like to invite the petitioner's representatives up, please.
Hello, my name is Michelle Ritter with Dow. With me this evening is Andrew Romadahl and Dale Ron, also with Providence, and Tim Potter, also with Dow. As staff mentioned, the site is located at the northwest intersection of Tudor and Piper. The surrounding zoning is a mixture of R3 to the east and north, and then west and north, and then to the east is R2M, which are all kind of multifamily mixed-use residential, and then B3 across the street on Tudor, which is developed with a gas station and also a vacant lot. We are requesting to rezone the parcel from R3 to RO, which is in line with the UMED district plan, which was adopted this year in March. As the Providence Medical Campus grows, it is outgrowing the central emergency area, so some of the ancillary services, which include outpatient services, are needing to be pushed out to the peripheral so that the emergency services can stay within the hospital area. In general, this is a trend that you see in hospitals. So the purpose of this rezone is just to allow for the development of outpatient medical. There has been, when we were initially started this application, there was some talk about potentially having assisted living. While that's not off the table, it will more than likely be medical office, so I just want to clarify that as part of the rezone. And again, it is in line with the UMED district plan, and it's in line with several policies in the Anchorage 2020 comprehensive plan. We did present this to the University Area Community Council. We actually went twice. The first time that we went in March, we found out that we were just shy of the 21-day required notice to the community by about a half a day. So we had to go back in May after it had been properly noticed for the 21 days. The council did not object, nor did it support the rezone request. And so that's kind of, I think staff did a really good job explaining the background, so I'd like to save my time to kind of hear some of your further up questions. But just to touch on some of the things that I heard from the commission, Commissioner Spring, as it's noted on the plat that they've shut down, that DOT is requiring us to shut down the driveway on Tudor, we will be required, as you always are for a new development, to get a driveway permit. as with that time, they will require, DOT will actually require that we do a traffic impact analysis that will evaluate any off-site mitigation that's required before they'll issue the driveway permit. And I think that was pretty much the only thing to address at this time. I'd say my time for rebuttal and answer any questions.
Yeah, you have 7 minutes for rebuttal, Mr. Spring.
Yes, I just want a clarification about the TIA. You said the DOT will ask for a TIA?
They will likely ask for it as well as the municipality, even though the access will likely be off of Piper because the impacts could be on Tudor, which is a state-operated and owned road. It'll be a combination of having to go through both DOT as well as the MOA traffic engineer.
I'm just a little confused. DOT, who owns Piper? The city owns Piper, right?
Correct.
So they don't have any, there's no driveway permit that the DOT will issue, so why would they ask for a TIA?
Well, we'll have to get the driveway permit through the municipality, but because the impacts could affect a state-operated and owned road, which is Tudor, DOT will also chime in and be part of that traffic impact analysis.
Okay, so they won't review and approve it,
They will review it. They'll be part of the review and approval process.
but they aren't responsible for approving it.
No, I'm sorry. It'll be
It's
MOA
the
that.
MOA that's responsible for approving it.
Correct.
You said that they won't issue a zoning permit unless they approve?
Driveway permit.
Excuse me?
Driveway permit.
The MOA won't issue a driveway permit.
Correct, until there's been a TIA that's been approved. If the future use triggers the threshold for a traffic impact analysis, which is typically 100 trips per peak hour, then they'll require a traffic impact analysis as part of us going in to get our driveway permit.
Oh, thank you.
A question from Mr. Strike.
Yeah, I think there's might be some confusion in looking at the DOT's comments for this project. It's very explicit. It doesn't say conditional upon a review. It is explicit and says no direct access will be given to Tudor Road.
Correct.
So they don't need a study. They've already told you there won't be any.
Correct, but we still need to get a driveway permit, and whether that's off of Piper or if 42nd was upgraded off of 42nd.
But it won't be Tudor.
It will not be Tudor. No, sorry if it led to any confusion on that. The impacts, because of the proximity to Tudor to Piper, there could be impacts on to Tudor if there was a long queue or something that spilled out. So that's why DOT would be involved with any review of the TIA.
So I think one of the concerns is the future impact on Piper, because as you have left-hand turn from Tudor onto Piper and right-hand turn from Tudor onto Piper, you could have potential backup of traffic coming back up as you're trying to make now a left-hand turn into the property.
Correct.
Along with any backed up traffic on Piper trying to get out on Tudor, and now all of a sudden you've created a bottleneck.
Right.
I mean, I can see that happening now, because it happens now, especially in the morning and in the afternoon. You can't, that's a turn that's going to be very difficult to make.
Right. And all of that would be looked at as part of a traffic impact analysis.
So until we don't know what the impact will be to the rest of the neighborhood, until the impact study's done, to determine if the traffic needs to come in off of Piper or off of 42nd.
Correct. And we also don't have a development, why we are very certain that it will be a medical office, maybe some type of assisted living, and that's, I say maybe strongly. Without a development, we don't really have anything to go with a TIA at this time.
So is it fair to say we don't know what the impact to the local community properties, surrounding properties will be at this point?
It is fair to say that, but it's also fair to say that any off-site impacts would be looked at and have to be mitigated prior to the MOA or DOT approving that TIA and the MOA approving a driveway permit. So we would have to, if we are showing that we are decreasing the level of service or creating an impact, off-site impact, we will have to mitigate that as part of our design for the future development.
Ms. Ritter, if you didn't rezone and you developed this at R3 density, would you have to get a TIA?
If the use, yes, if the use was one that required it, so if it generated over 100 trips per peak hour, yes, we would be required to do that.
Do you think an R3 parcel that's 4 acres would generate over 100 trips at peak hour?
I do think that.
Do you have any sense of the difference of impact under the existing zoning, R3, and the proposed RO? We know that from a zoning standpoint, there's a height difference, there's a setback difference, there's a lot coverage difference, there's things like that frankly we might discuss here this evening. But do you have any, aside from an additional floor that you might get, do you have any idea of the change in impact from one to the other? Because really this isn't about a change from a vacant lot to a developed. It's a change from a existing zoning and everything that you could do under that existing zoning to the proposed zoning. That's what we're here to discuss.
Right.
Do you have any idea on that?
I think that, from a design standpoint, a lot of the concerns from offsite can be handled through design, and that you can design an office building to blend well into a university medical district that has both offices and residential. So I think that a lot of that can be offset through design mitigation. From a traffic standpoint, I think that the difference that you would see is the timing of traffic. If you have residential, you're going to have people that are leaving and coming during the typical hours of work hours. With a medical office, you're going to see traffic coming at different times. But I would also go on to say that that's going to be when most of the people who live around the area aren't at home, and they're probably off-site and probably won't realize that there is that traffic coming in and out.
Great, thanks. I cut you off, Mr. Strike. Any more questions? You're good. Mr. Sporhays.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, the petitioner answered all the concerns and questions I had. Thank you.
I had a couple more questions. Are you aware of what the special limitations is on the R3 lot to the?
No.
Remind me, that's a condo project. I mean, it's an older one, but it's fairly well done. It's kind of buffered by a lot of landscaping, so it might be related to a PUD or something like that. We don't know, though.
No, and I even checked with Mr. Potter, and he didn't know.
Jeez.
I know.
Stumped you. Any thoughts on this, the kind of your treatment of buffer? I mean, typically in these types of situations, you do have a lot RO that's adjacent to R3 and R2M. Those can be different. Is it adjacent to R2M or just adjacent to the R3?
It's directly adjacent to the R3, but it's across Piper's R2M.
So the R3, any thoughts on if you had a client moving forward with a project, whether you just say, hey, keep it to 10 feet and add a fence, or would there be any special treatment? Or do you think, given the size of the tract, there'd be any objection to making sure that you have that full 15 feet of buffer?
We've honestly not gone that far down the design conversation. I would have to double check with my client, but I don't believe there'd be any objection to keeping it with 15 feet, whether there was a fence or not.
What about height?
That I also need to double check. And I'm assuming you're talking about keeping it to 35 instead of 45.
Well, I think that's I'm not I'm just contemplating it, right? There's a difference in the surrounding adjacent zoning, so there's different ways to deal with that. One is just to say you ought to be the same. If it was up to me, they'd both be a 45-foot height limit, but they're not.
I'd hate to limit the height on the medical, then create a situation where we need more parcels to create more medical because we've limited how much we can get into this site. So I would probably not.
Well, that sort of insinuates that we'll be okay with just chomping away, and that's sort of, I think the bigger issue is, in my evaluation of this rezoning, is where does it stop?
Right.
Where is the line in the sand so that we know where the residential land is? We know that redevelopment is way more feasible for medical office than it would be for multifamily. But if we keep chomping away at our multifamily,
right,
we got other issues. So maybe you could check, I'm going to go to Mr. Strike for a question, but during public hearing, if you could check on some of those with your client, that'd be great. Mr. Strike.
One of the concerns I have is that when this was 3 smaller lots, we probably didn't have the same traffic concerns that we're raising, that you're seeing here tonight. The replat creates one single larger lot as an R3. Regardless, it would require, because of the larger lot size, is going to require, any development on that lot is going to require a traffic plan, correct? As an R3.
Yes.
We're looking to change this to RO and then make it subject to a traffic plan. It's still going to be subject to a traffic plan.
Right.
My hesitancy right now is I sure would love to see that traffic plan done before you come in for the rezone, because it has to be done regardless.
It does have to be done, but it's very hard to do a traffic impact analysis when you don't have a project. And I understand what your concern is, but when DOT or the MOA is looking at that analysis, they really need to, part of their review is what is that use, not only what is the size of that use, but is it a multifamily residential or is it a medical office that's triggering this, because it's going to have a different level of a review.
Well, with that argument, can't you reverse it and say that with the traffic plan, it's going to generate the best use for the property based on the traffic that it would allow in that area? It's just the opposite argument.
Well, yeah, but there could be design considerations that could mitigate the off-site design. So,
I mean, a traffic plan may come by and say this area is only susceptible to X amount of traffic, and that's going to dictate maybe how that property then gets developed. Rather than, here's what we want to build, support it through a traffic plan, support what it is we want to build, because we tend to see traffic studies geared towards what the person wants built, not what should be built.
okay.
Any other questions for the petitioner before we go to public hearing? Thank you. You have 6 minutes and 57 seconds remaining.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to invite anyone else down that wishes to testify. Remember that you get 5 minutes if you're a member of a group, 3 minutes if you're speaking as an individual. Please state your name clearly for the record, and when that light goes yellow, you've got a minute left.
My name is Paul Stang. I'm president of the University Area Community Council, and I'd like to talk about the issue on Piper and Tudor. We have testified before the Planning and Zoning about our concerns about the loss of residential space and the movement from R3 to RO, where the R of RO is immediately cast aside and it turns out to be office. We are concerned about the chopping away that you mentioned, Mr. Robinson, about residential areas, and we merely go on our way one by one, chomp, 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 and we don't know where we're heading. We just follow whatever comes in front of us, and that is of concern. I think the Muni needs to really focus on the larger picture here, residential areas, especially in our community council area, where we have a lot of commercial buildings and commercial enterprises, university and hospital and what have you. We're concerned about the traffic also, and I can witness firsthand, because often I travel down Tudor, turn left on Piper, often waiting for a light, 2 lights, sometimes 3 lights, because there's a lot of traffic often coming west on Tudor. We have a concern about not only the traffic, but the extra pollution caused by the traffic. More parking lots are needed, and what we don't have is a place where people can walk to work, can bike to work, a place where we diminish the need for parking and commuting. We want an area that has that ability to walk and bike to work. It makes for a sounder environment and a better neighborhood. This is a strong trend in many cities, the co-mixing of commercial and residential areas. And it's a trend that has been popular and successful. But I'm afraid that's not happening in Anchorage to the best that we can see, and we are concerned about it for the city as a whole, but also our University Area Community Council residents. We think it's critical that there be at least some residential housing as part of any rezoning of this lot as a special condition. We are supportive of the hospital and the needs of the hospital. That's clear. That's an important institution for us all. But we think that we have to look more broadly at these issues and not just take, as we seem to be doing, the chopping away, which is of great concern to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Walker.
Mr. Stang, so you've expressed some concerns here, but you're not expressing support or opposition on behalf of the council here today?
We are opposed to just giving this movement of R3 to RO with no residential housing. It says in here, by the way, in this package that we got, that there were no comments received. Well, that is incorrect. Another person will address that, who will speak after I do. And I'll have to say, I didn't get a copy of the notice of the deadline for written comments. I do recall when Dow came on 2 occasions, they wanted to come on 2 occasions to talk to us about this. But I don't recall any mention of the date that comments would be due. So is there further question about our position?
That'll do it. Thank you.
I see no further questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify?
My name is Gary Solin, S-O-L-I-N, and I own property at 3200 East 40th, which is on East 40th between Piper and Dale. I've owned that property since 1980. I lived there from 1980 to 1984. It's a duplex, and my sons live there now. I'm not in favor of this rezoning for some of the same reasons that the previous speaker talked about. This area is predominantly residential. Providence is a major landowner in that area, not just around the hospital, but also to the south there, or between East 40th and East 45th. But the character is still duplexes and single families. I'm concerned about the traffic, the increased traffic. When I bought the place in 1980, it was a gravel road that was oiled. And to the north of East 40th, it was, I assumed it was a park, but it was not. It was land that all the landowners were discussing with lawyers over who owned it. And then about 10, 15 years ago, all that land was split up, and the development that occurred that did. Piper was rebuilt about 7 years ago, and East 40th was extended to Lake Otis about 3 years ago. When Piper was rebuilt, the roundabout was not in that initial thing that was added about 3 years ago. As part of that project, it was actually Mr. Potter's firm that was the engineer on that, and I attended all those hearings. And Mr. Noble, who was one of the design engineers, commented after they built Piper that they added some traffic calming at Piper and East 42nd, and he wishes that that traffic calming would be higher than what it was built. Subsequently, they've added the roundabout, and I don't know if some of the commissioners have talked about the traffic on Tudor Road, but you should stand at that roundabout around 8 in the morning or 5. And I believe that all those people that are traveling, they all have medical training, because I think if there was an accident, they'd be able to treat themselves. And the increase in traffic has been very marked from 1980. I know there's talk of expanding East 42nd, and so if you do approve this, I think that you should require the applicant to do some traffic calming at East 40th, at Piper, Dale, and I'm trying to think of the next street just to the west of there. But the residential area should be encouraged, and also traffic should be calmed down. And there's very little storm sewer in that area. It's just intermittent, and there's a lot of individual wells in that area. So people they're on sanitary sewer, but they're on their own well, so there's that concern.
Thank you, Mr. Schilling. I have a question for you from Mr. Spring.
Yes, sir. The maps are hard to figure out on this packet, but 42nd does go all the way through, correct?
That's correct. And
it doesn't show the right-of-way here on this map, but
right.
It does go through.
I mean, and that's a very heavily used road as a.
I was going to ask you, what do you think the cut-through traffic is?
It's a lot.
Are there any sidewalks on 42nd?
No, there's been some, the people from University Area Community Council could address it more. It's been a while, but there was, about the time Piper was pushed through, there was two people walking along the road and killed by drunk drivers. So I know that's a real concern. I don't know where it is in the municipality's CIP type project, but I know that there's no sidewalks along East 42nd.
So what do you think that would happen if there's additional medical offices here with more traffic?
Well, it'd be even more traffic. And there is East 40th, there's a nice sidewalk on the south side and a trail on the north side. East 41st, that's in that area, that's about the only spot that there is sidewalks, and that was part of East 40th being pushed through to Lake Otis. And actually during the process of East 40th, it sort of changed, and it wasn't initially designed to be a collector, and then the final bit, it was designed as a collector street. And they added city water down East 40th. There's 14 lots between Piper and Dale, and there's only 2 lots that are on city water. The rest are on their own well, as my property is. So,
thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Anyone else wishing to testify?
Barbara Garner. I'm a resident of East 42nd Avenue, and I've lived there since 1967. I knew it when it was a big forest, and a lot of those trees are gone. There's so much to say here, and I don't know where to begin, except that the traffic is horrendous on Piper Street. A lot of people are using shortcuts coming from Providence Drive, and they come on Piper, wiggling around and going around the roundabout and getting to Tudor Road, where they want to make a left turn to get to Elmore. It's a big situation. From my house, which is near Providence Horizon House on Folker Street, I have to go to Folker, I go out to 40th, I go to the roundabout, and then I go south to get to my friend's house on East 41st Avenue. That's how busy that intersection is at 42nd and Piper Street. I am opposed to this project as it stands. We had said years ago that we would accept mixed uses. We would need the idea of having people able to live in this area again. And what troubles me, I understand that in the land use plan, it says somewhere in those 154 pages that if you remove an R3 or residential zone, you have to provide it someplace else. Where is this going to go? Can we keep it here? And this definitely is in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's not commercial. The ROs are bookended at the other ends. And so there's no RO in this particular area. There are no commercial along Tudor Road at this particular area. And the commercial that you do have is on the south side of Tudor Road, not on the north side where this is. It's very difficult for me to talk about this simply because we just had another master plan meeting on Folker Park, which is less than 2 blocks away this afternoon. We're planning to redo that park. And it's because there's so many people who live here who need a space to go to have a park. This is also a non-motorized area, highly active one. We get a lot of bikers, a lot of runners, a lot of college students walking in here. So what's going to happen to all of this if medical offices go in and add to the traffic situation? 42nd Avenue is on the list many years now to have a CIP. There's over $500,000 there waiting for it. We've been waiting to have it used. And we could never get it when it was cheaper. Now it's just $1 million to get the engineering done for it, let alone have it done. So that is a sense of where I'm coming from at the moment, and I could really give you a lot of history, but I will hold off. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for your testimony. Anyone else wishing to testify? Anyone at all? Invite the petitioner back up for a rebuttal. It's for a question later. Yeah.
So I was able to confer with our client, and they are okay with a 15-foot buffer with no fence, so along the property line. They would like to maintain the ability to build up to 45 feet without putting a height restriction on that. We understand the community and the planning and zoning's concern about residential. However, there is huge concern, I think with a lot of support, of why we do not want to see a residential requirement put on the rezone. A lot of that has to do with just recent projects that we've looked at that have shown that it's really hard to financially make a project pencil out when you're required to have that residential component. But in addition to that, with this specific landowner, it's going to be very hard for them when residential is not something that's in their wheelhouse and they're competing for other funds. They will likely not be able to get the funding they even need for the medical office building. So that could be a detriment to the development. I also just want to point out that this is on, there is a bus route on Tudor, and just want to highlight that, yes, we realize that it could be generating more traffic, but there is a bus route, and that Providence is really moving forward to encouraging transit use for primary care. And then also just want to hit on that as part of the platting requirements, we actually have to improve 42nd Street to collector standards. So that includes sidewalk as well as lighting and landscaping. So that will be improved as part of the plat. So, and there's actually a flag in the building permit center that if any permit goes through for that property for building, then they have to upgrade the road. And I think with that, Tim has a few items to add.
Tim Potter for the record. Mr. Strike, on your chicken and egg question of what come first, you could likely do it either way. But medicine is changing and the technology so quickly that it is difficult to tell until you actually have the programming for a facility done to figure out just exactly what it's going to be. So in the diagnostic session, if you have large areas of imaging equipment and those kinds of things, it generates very little traffic because it's a large room occupied by a technician and one client or customer. So those are kind of some of the dynamics. In this situation, I think that we need to make sure that we allow Providence the ability to meet its needs for the community and the state, because it is a statewide trauma complex and our center of health. Secondarily, it's important that it's the siting of the building on that site that is key. So you see 4 acres as a scary thing, and I see 4 acres as, holy cow, we can really do some work to site the building so that it's more located at the corner of Tudor and Piper. We stay away from the church. We're not casting shadows on the condominium up to the north because we can be right down on Tudor where the bus stop is. Piper is a collector street. Gee, you want these kind of buildings at collectors and arterials. In fact, Tudor's on our national highway system, so that's not a bad thing. And there are pedestrian and bike improvements from Tudor Road all the way up to Providence Drive, with traffic calming, raised platform intersections, chokers, all kinds of things. So, yeah, have there been a lot of changes since 1980? Yes, there have. Residential, Providence does own quite a few residential units in the neighborhood, and they're attempting to help meet the needs of residential in the area. It's a real interesting dynamic trade-off of we have a UMed district, and yes, residential is a component of that, but even by name, the key thing is the university and medical facilities. And that's important to keep in mind. Building height is one of the other issues that you talked about. In the R3, you can go to 35 feet. With the planning and development in the R3 district, you can go to 40 feet. So we're talking 45 feet and a difference of 5 feet with the siting benefits that we have. Now, if we would have left that property as 3 parcels, one of the parcels would have only been able to go out to Tudor Road, as it previously did in the past. And you would have had that additional driveway conflict on Tudor, which is really not a good thing. Because the site is long, north and south, we've got the ability to move a driveway on Piper Street way up north and allow an area for that clear zone for queuing and backup and other things to happen. The other interesting thing is I'd be willing to bet that in an R3 development done densely at about 40 to 50 units per acre, that you would actually have more traffic in the peak hours as people leave, especially in the morning, than you'd have with a medical office building that probably has transitional timings for starting and opening of the offices, really keying up the operation. And in a commercial operation, especially in medical, you can modify and manage the trips by virtue of when you have openings and when you're open or when your shift changes are. You can't do that with residential. So you can actually fine-tune the medical and the office to work in the condition. You've got a lot more flexibility to mitigate. And if you really need to mitigate, then you do enlargement of the intersection lanes, those types of things. So the big site has a lot of benefits. It allows us a good north-south distance, buffer ourselves from the church next door and the residential to the north of the church, and allow us to really put the building on Tudor Road at Piper and do all the things that all the design direction out of the 2020 plan suggested that we should be doing. So quite frankly, I think the bigger issue is really the site plan versus any traffic issues or anything else that are going on right now. And as far as inclusion of residential in this facility, Mr. Robinson, I'll call out, understands just how difficult it is, and I know that he went on his trip quickly to round this up.
Real quick, there are questions for you in the queue.
Okay, the trip that went down to Wichita and Oklahoma City confirmed with the developers that were located there that, holy cow, why is anybody doing residential? To create a situation where a necessary growth for the medical is there, and to require it to have a housing component that isn't just to meet the market need. It's actually a 30 or 40% gap in financing to be able to do that residential.
I'm going to stop you there, Mr. Potter. If there's further questions about that, we'll flush them out. But question from Mr. Strike, then Mr. Spring, then Ms. Barker.
Yeah, well, I thank you. I recognize the allowing the petitioner to meet its needs, but we don't know what its needs are because it doesn't know what its development looks like yet. So they haven't identified their need yet because they haven't identified what they want to build. But you raise a good point that the petitioner and or through its other subsidiary companies, related companies, owns other property on Piper and or 40th or 42nd. Do you know who owns the property on the corner of Piper and 40th, on the south side of 40th, on the west side of Piper?
Providence does.
So they own that piece of property as well. So
yes.
Ultimately, they're going to develop other pieces of property on Piper, which would also have a bearing on any transportation issues on Piper Road. So as we piecemeal this activity, one lot at a time, as we move north on Piper, we're going to create, without a transportation plan, without some long-term transportation plan of what the impact on Piper might be. Right now, my fear is we're trying to put the nose under the tent and do one little lot at a time or one movement at a time, when in fact this particular client owns multiple pieces of property in the area that's going to create a transportation issue, not just with these lots, but with the other future lots as well. We don't have a comprehensive plan here on what the impact is on the neighborhood in Piper with the future development.
I'll try and respond to your, I think, question or comments. Yes, Providence did acquire that piece of property on an agreement with the current occupant who still lives there as a single-family home, actually an old Quonset hut that was modified with some dormers and a garage building. And when she and her husband decide that they're done or they die, Providence will take over the property. Now, it has not been requested to do a rezone of that property. If you look at my comments to the 2040 land use plan map, it was only this corner that was contentious. The stippling pattern was not asked to be modified on the northern piece of property. Yes, they do have their Horizon House, which is an assisted living and nursing care facility on 41st, I guess. And I believe it's a good neighbor. You could almost call that residential of sorts. It doesn't generate a lot of traffic, certainly not a lot of noise, and fits into the neighborhood. And I think all the people in the audience would say that Horizon House across from Folker Park is a good neighbor and fits in. So that is that balance, and I would hope that you'd see that Providence has grown a lot to meet the needs of the state and the community, but they've also done a very, I'll say it on the record, damn good job. They build nice stuff. They maintain it. They address issues when asked by the community, and they are good citizens. And, you know, that doesn't mean that you should do everything they ask you to do, but you should take that into consideration, that they've been developing good stuff for a long time. They live there too, and this will be the forefront gateway into the UMed district.
And one last comment. I guess one of the concerns I have is that we're creating an island zoning situation here. And just looking at the map here, we're creating an island of RO zoning in the midst of the R2 and R3.
Well, let's see. I would broaden your view a little bit and not just look at the north side of the road, but there is a now empty, cleared, filled, and compacted B3 site, which you don't have any level of control over because it's already zone B3. They will have to do a TIA, will likely not get access to Tudor, which brings up other issues on Piper Street that was not upgraded south of Tudor. That is a problematic intersection. So if you look at the church next door, that's an item just across the street from the church is Sutton's, which is a commercial greenhouse, and that begins a commercial strip. And if you go a little further to the east, there's a commercial strip.
Thank you.
There's a dentist that was put in just down the street.
Thank you. Mr. Spring.
Yes, Mr. Potter. Yeah, based on what you told me or told us, I think you convinced me that we need to have a site plan review, because I agree with you. There's room, there's a big lot, and there's room to probably mitigate the impact on the surrounding neighborhood, but how do we know that's going to be done unless we have a site plan review? And secondarily, when the TIA is done, hopefully it would be done with the site plan review, because I don't think there's any mitigation measures that can be done, the standard ones, like put in a traffic light, put in another left turn lane. What's really going to be the crux of the TIA is probably going to be the size of the development. The only thing you can really affect as far as the traffic generation is how many square feet do you have in the building, and also, like you said, I think, pointed out, maybe there's ways to change the operating hours or something, you know, to mitigate the peak hour traffic and things like that. So without the TIA in conjunction with the site plan, what you say is nice, but it doesn't, there's no way to really know if it's going to work unless we review a site plan with the TIA.
Wow. I want to say something very carefully. If I were the municipal traffic engineer and the state traffic engineer, I guess I'd be very frustrated with what you just said. That you don't know and you don't trust that they would do their job to make sure that everything works.
Mr. Chair, I
Go ahead.
totally disagree with that. I don't.
If you have a
I'm not
question, you can
missing
ask
the
it and then just ask.
traffic,
Then I can
engineers,
ask.
and I never have in my life. And
you know,
I really
Spring,
object.
Mr. Spring, if you have a direct question for the petitioner, I'll go ahead and ask. Do you have a question related to the site plan review, or was that a comment? Because I want to move us along in a cordial manner, but I'd like to keep us to the points that you really want the petitioner to address at this point.
Mr. Spring, you're right.
Hold on, Mr. Potter. Do you have any
No,
questions
he's-
specific?
I would like him to continue addressing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were correct. It's the size and square footage of what you build. It's the programmed uses within it, and then what other things you can do to mitigate it. So not knowing exactly the program that would be proposed to go into the building, it's hard to project what those trips would be. But I can assure you that it doesn't do us any good to have a non-functional facility either. So that will be the balance that is done. And that balance gets done on every project that goes through at this time when we trigger that threshold of 10% increase in the number of trips. And, you know, since it's a undeveloped empty piece of property, that 10% doesn't take much to increase in the peak hour. So there will be a TIA. Scott Thomas at DOT, because of the interest in the intersection, will be involved, and we will want it to work as well.
Can I follow up one?
Yeah, go ahead.
In my experience, I don't know of any TIAs that really address the size of the development. Once you submit the traffic generation, then they look at how they can address the situation from an engineering point of view, like traffic lights, et cetera. I don't know of any situations where they said, I'm sorry, but you have too big of a development there. You need to reduce the development size.
We've recently been involved in one at the Native Medical Center and that entire campus. And we worked it frontwards and backwards. And the municipal traffic engineer placed a cap on the number of square feet that could be, and program that can be included based on the number of trips generated for the peak hours. And I mean, that is what, within the last 3 months? So it does happen.
Good. A question from Ms. Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be short. Kind of curious when Providence acquired this property and at what time it actually became vacant.
I guess 2007 is when they acquired the property.
And how long has it been vacant?
About the same time.
There was a trailer park, actually several trailer parks that were on the 3 lots, and not necessarily some of the best neighbors. There was at least one shooting that occurred there prior to it being shut down, and they were older trailers for the most part, and they were removed. The site cleared. It was used for a laydown yard by Davis Constructors while they were doing the mother-baby facility, and now it's been sitting vacant, graded out, and controlled since that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the petitioner? Any at all? Hearing none, the public hearing is closed. Thank you for your presentation and your responses. What's the will of the body? Go ahead, Mr. Sporhes.
Well, after hearing the recommendations from staff and public testimony, I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the RO zoning as recommended by staff and the 9 items that they said that this rezoning meant, and to rezone from R3 to residential office.
Thank you to Mr. Suarez. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Walker. Any additional comments to your motion, Mr. Suarez?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the petitioner did a good job. You know, they walked us through kind of the history of this, the benefit to it. They also explained that with the current owner not having any development plans, that they're unable to identify a traffic impact analysis statement. Also, you know, unable to identify a site plan review until there's a need for the site. But this rezoning is in line with the UMed district plan that was approved March 6th of 2016, was approved by the Assembly, and I think that's all I got to say.
Thank you. Mr. Spring, you're in the queue.
Thank you. I won't be supporting the motion. I would like the planning department to consider in major rezonings some type of analysis for traffic impacts. I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily have the plans in hand to do it, but the commission needs to have some information about what the impacts are going to be. We can't be making decisions regarding this because we can't take it back once it's approved. It's going to be zoned RO, so there's going to be some development there. And based on what I know of the ITE, the traffic engineering manual, the trip generation rate for medical offices is one of the highest trip generation sources in the city. I don't know if there's going to be just an imaging thing with one person, you know, handling it, but you look around these medical offices and they're tremendous trip generators, tremendous. We have no control over it whatsoever once the rezoning's done. And it's a lot more than an R3 zoning, I can tell you. The trip generation's a lot higher than that. It's going to be a big impact on the intersection of Piper and Tudor. I really would like to have some information next time this comes up. It's too late now, but I really want some information about traffic impacts when we do a rezoning. 4 acres is a big piece of land. I can't do it. I can't support it. I might be able to support something that would require the site plan review, which I think is necessary in order to make sure that the impacts to the single-family residential that's right next to it isn't impacted. And also, I think is tied in with the TIA, we could have some input regarding the mitigation measures as far as it pertains to the size of the development. Leaving it up to the traffic engineer might be fine, but in this case, I think if we could combine it with the site plan, we'd have all the information we would need to make a good decision. So I won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. If you so choose, you can always make that motion for a site plan review. Mr. Walker.
I will be supporting the motion. It's consistent with the UMed plan. Multifamily is not currently feasible, but I think that it's important to point out that R3 could accommodate a high enough density on that lot to create some pretty serious traffic problems. So I kind of feel like we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, and I do think that that's going to get looked at when they decide to develop the property. And I'm not as suspicious that the traffic engineer and the DOT aren't going to do their job at that time. Providence is a nonprofit, but they're still market driven to a certain degree. They can't build something that's not going to support itself or make money, and if they create something that's a traffic problem, that's not good for anybody. So I think economically there's going to be some motivation there to find a good middle ground. So I'd be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Ms. Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will not be supporting the motion. I'm really concerned about the net loss, continued net loss of residential land. particularly in this neighborhood where, as colleague Mr. Walker pointed out, a significant number of multifamily units could be built within the existing zoning designation to help provide accessible, walkable, bikeable housing for people who don't make big salaries, who are the ones who often keep these medical campuses running on a 24/7 basis. I'm also concerned when I simply look at the layout of the land uses on the map. You know, to the west we have kind of a barrier of non-residential uses. We have the Thai kitchen and that strip mall over there of commercial. On top of that, we've got more RO. We rezoned this and we've basically marooned this little enclave of very modest single-family and duplex homes. And I think, frankly, it kind of puts the neighborhood in peril. So for those reasons, I will not be supporting the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. Mr. Sporhays.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Spring, I'm in agreement with you. I think the TIA should have been done prior to this rezoning. I also believe that it should have been done during the UMED district plan when they identified this as residential office and low-density office. You know, here we've got again, an approved plan that the petitioner believes that they have the ability to act on. Here we go through a rezoning process to, you know, everything we know, an R3 to an RO. It's been clearly identified, in my opinion, that R3 is not an intended use of the landowner. You know, I'm in full agreement with you that a traffic study would be nice, but it should have been done, I believe, during the actual land use plan. As far as Commissioner Mitzi's comments, you know, I think that we look at this from who's the petitioner versus kind of what's the intended use. You know, there's commercial up and down along Tudor that hasn't really affected this neighborhood. This is basically just going to be additional commercial office. It's going to give more opportunity for people in the neighborhood, employment, even closer to where they live, where they could walk. And I think it's a good project for the area. The traffic has picked up since 1967, since 1980. There's no doubt about it. But I think that this petitioner is actually the best at helping with the traffic calming, the best mediation that they could do with the traffic, and that we should be supportive to their rezone.
Thank you, Mr. Sporhays. I would remind you that who is the petitioner is not one of our criteria that we're using to evaluate. So I'd caution you on that one. But
I do agree.
They can always sell that parcel off to somebody else. So I would remind you that happens pretty regularly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's actually what I was asking is that if they did sell it off, it would be in line with other, you know, commercial developments along Tudor that would not have access to Tudor, that would be as page 12 in our packet, main access would be in and off of Piper, but it'd be a different type of development, whether that's office or residential. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Strike.
Thank you. I'm usually one of the first ones to look for ways to develop the properties and land, but I have a problem here in that I disagree with Mr. Walker here, that I disagree that this does follow the UMAD district plan. It specifically calls out for this area being office, low intensity. And we don't know what this is going to be because we don't know what the petitioner is looking to build here yet. To do a carte blanche, change the zoning because they want to build something, I'm not going to support this plan. I think when they're ready to decide what they want to build and they have a traffic plan, come on in. But right now, with the lack of the traffic situation, with the duplicity of the other lots that they have in the area, that we are creating a traffic bottleneck here on Piper that I've witnessed firsthand and been stuck in that traffic and couldn't make the left-hand turn onto Piper and couldn't get out onto Tudor, let alone as I'm traversing going into the UMED area. So there is a problem there. So lack of answers, so I'm not able to support this motion at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Ms. Bailey.
I also am not going to be able to support this motion. I think the main problem for me resolves that it really is taking this zoning as is, and that while the petitioners could have the best intentions, we can't read into those good intentions, and we can't take them at their word because someone else could come and buy that property once it's rezoned. Another problem I see with this is that because someone else could buy that property and move in, I don't think it's just like the commercial corridor that's on Tudor. All the other areas along Tudor are a small size lot. This has now been replatted as a huge lot that also has no access onto Tudor. And so while that could be great for an office in the future, for something in the future, it could result in a whole bunch of problems if this lot is later sold off to then be this very large use that only has access from a side road and it's constantly directed away. So for those reasons, I would have a problem supporting this.
Mr. Sporhays, you have spoken twice to the motion already. Is there something new? You're not allowed to debate every other commissioner. You can speak to the motion. So I'm not going to allow you to speak again unless there's some new piece of information that you really want to unearth.
Maybe a little clarification if I could.
Go ahead.
Just real quick. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm concerned and maybe confused, this might not be the right time to do it, and if it isn't, I apologize, that you've got a zoning that's being denied that flies in the face of the land use plan map, that also flies in the face.
Mr. Sporhays, you have made that testimony already. If there's nothing else to add to it, I don't see, your voice will be on the record. You've made the finding that it's consistent with the plan map. You have made the finding that it's consistent with the UMED plan. I've heard that as a finding. I've heard other commissioners bring up other issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My concern is that the UMED map and the 2040 map are not the same, but that's just my concern.
And your point is what then? That they're consistent with one and not the other. So it's our decision here with the facts that you have in front of you, and I think you've indicated how you're going to vote, and others have done the same. Thanks. Anyone else wishing to testify? Or, I'm sorry, speak to the motion. Hearing none, please vote. That rezoning fails. The petitioner is able to go to the assembly and make the case that you would like to make. We will have a resolution likely at our next meeting. We do have a meeting next, so if we can get that turned around for the petitioner, that'd be great. Mr. Potter, it's not common to speak, but go ahead. You have a logistical question? Or?
This is a logistical question. This is one of those times when, as the Planning and Zoning Commission deliberates and goes their direction, the discussion about they could sell the property and then it would just be RO and it wouldn't be Providence. It could be Lee Baker, for God's sake. And totally get that. And I would have liked to have had the opportunity to respond to that and say, Providence is never afraid of bringing forward a site plan review because they're proud of what they do. So if the real measurement that turned a number of the commissioners against this rezone was the fact that there was some unknown commodity of what the outcome would be, we would put forward and ask you to reconsider possibly tonight or for next week and consider a site plan review that would require a TIA to be done so that you can look at whether they own the property or someone else does. And I understand your concerns over that point.
Mr. Walker, go ahead.
So I was expecting Mr. Spring to bring that amendment to the motion. And
So yeah, so here's the
What do we do
deal.
now?
So the only thing that can happen, given that we made a decision here this evening, is those that voted on the prevailing side, in this case those that voted no, have 24 hours from this point to spread notice of reconsideration. If they decide to do that, and that was 4 or 5 of us, I can't remember, then that this case can be reconsidered at our next meeting. And at that point, if someone would like to offer that, then it can go that direction, and we can take it up. We can re-vote on it with however it is amended. So that's the process from here. Otherwise, the petitioner can move forward to the assembly as is. They can either propose a site plan review or not as part of their proposal to the assembly. Those are the two options here in front of us. Thank you for your testimony. Next up, we have two items from staff. Hopefully these are relatively quick. There are also public hearing items. Case 2016-0122. This is an amendment to Anchorage Municipal Code 2105010, table of allowed uses to add healthcare facility up to 15,000 square feet on an individual parcel in the I-1 district. Could we have the staff report, please?
Through the chair to the commission, this particular Title 21 amendment is...
Terry, can you get a little closer to the mic?
I can, thank you. This proposed text amendment to Anchorage Title 21 corrects a situation that has occurred in the application of old Title 21 regarding the permitting of healthcare facilities in the I-1 industrially zoned property throughout the Anchorage Bowl. And under old Title 21, it was not entirely clear to a lot of the practitioners in Anchorage that, in fact, medical practices were not allowed in that zone. However, within the planning department, it was enforced along those lines. Under old code, under the I-1 Light Industrial District, permitted principal uses and structures included commercial uses, business and professional offices. Under prohibited uses in that same code, prohibited uses and structures, there was no mention of healthcare facilities. It was through an interpretation in a different paragraph, actually, that led to the interpretation that medical practices were not allowed. So the issue was then that under new Title 21, it was very clearly identified that medical practices would not be allowed in the I-1 zone. And we've, over time, under old Title 21, a number of different medical practices obtained tenant improvement permits to basically locate in various parts of Anchorage in the I-1 zone, and have now come back either seeking permission to renovate or in some cases even to sell, only to be turned down and be notified that they were illegal non-conforming uses. So there's really no alternative but to eliminate that use from that particular practice. And there are a lot of older office buildings throughout the I-1 zone. So in reviewing other other uses, commercial uses in the I-1 zone, it's clear that attorneys' offices and architecture offices and any range of commercial offices, including veterinary offices and big box stores and a whole range of things that are actually quite similar to a medical practice, but not including those, have been included in that zone. In trying to do some research, I was never able to actually obtain from anyone a reason why medical practice was not allowed in the zone. So what we are proposing with this text change is to allow up to 15,000 square feet of gross area within the I-1 zone to be health services, and that's outpatient services. It wouldn't include things like hospitals. And it's smaller than what would allow a medical office building to go in. But it could include like an entire floor of an existing office building to become a medical practice, or a chiropractic office, or any of a number of things. With a number of dental offices are located in this zone. So the intent at this point is to modify that so that we allow small to medium medical practices in the I-1 zone, which we feel is pretty consistent with other commercial uses that currently are allowed within that zone.
Thank you, Mr. Schoenthal. The question from Mr. Strike.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. Would a landowner, building owner, then have to be cognizant of the total amount of square footage that they are allowing in a building? So that if they had, I'm just going to pull numbers, they had a 45,000 square foot building, they would be limited to only allowing 15,000 square feet to be used for medical office?
That would be correct.
So once they reach that threshold, it's incumbent?
And that is what the intent is right now. It's a bit of a compromise, but the idea is that the medical practices that would locate in these would be more neighborhood service as opposed to larger scale, rather than open the door to the full development of medical practices or medical office buildings in the I-1 zone, that we could allow basically more medium practices within this industrial zone.
Does this bring the current permits that were allowed by the municipality, does that bring many of these buildings then into compliance?
It brings all of our known cases into compliance.
And is the 15,000 square feet identified to accomplish the compliance, or is this a arbitrary number?
It's a little on the arbitrary end, I will admit that, but what we wanted to do was a typical floor, perhaps, of an office building could occupy that much space. And so we did check. We checked it with other medical practices that are out there, dental practices and others. And that is probably the upper limit of what we would consider a medium-sized practice.
So that was my question. Why 15,000? Why not 10,000 or 12,500? What made 15,000 the magical number?
Just looking at the ones we had out there right now, they're in the 10, in some cases as much as 10 to 12,000 square feet. So,
and so this closes the, not the loophole, but this closes the inconsistencies in permitting that's taken place in the past, puts everybody on an even playing field moving forward, and we have a clean slate?
That's our hope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. Any other questions? So hearing none, I'd like to open the public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to testify on case 2016-0122? Anyone at all? Hearing none, the public hearing is closed. What's the will of the body? Go ahead, Mr. Strike.
I'll take a stab at this. In the matter of case 2016-0122, amending AMC 21.05, user regulations allowing healthcare facilities in the I-1 zone, I move for approval.
Seconded by Mr. Walker. Any discussion?
I would like to thank the staff for clarifying and bringing this gap that had existed to a conclusion. I think that this solves a number of issues, but look for the staff to ensure that we are managing and monitoring the future permits accordingly.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
I'll be supporting the motion and just wanted to commend staff. Nicely done. I think this definitely needed to happen, and I've been communicating with them during this process. And just as a full disclosure, I didn't think to disclose this up front at the top of the meeting, but my family owns an I-1 site. We don't have any plans to develop it with anything at this point, but it could potentially be affected by this, obviously. So anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Any additional comments? Please vote on the motion. That motion is approved. On case 2016-0128, text amendments to Anchorage Municipal Code Title 21. Can we have a staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These text amendments will establish the allowed principal use type of outdoor storage associated with community use and outdoor storage of vehicles and or equipment associated with community use in the PLI, PR, CE PLI, and CE PR zoning districts. Considering the intent and nature of these zoning districts, outdoor storage is an appropriate use and will assist in facilitating regular maintenance and enhancement of community use properties, as well as aid in new construction projects which have a public benefit. Planning staff has determined that the PLI and PR districts are appropriate for outdoor storage as a principal use on a standalone lot because uses within these districts are primarily community facilities. This will allow outdoor storage to occur on a standalone lot only when that lot is owned by and associated with that community use. Additional evaluation of other appropriate zoning districts was conducted by planning staff, specifically the I-1 and B3 zoning districts. It was determined that this use should not be allowed in the I-1 because a storage yard is already a permitted use in that district. Staff has concerns about unforeseen issues associated with allowing outdoor storage as a principal use within a commercial district, and for this reason, the proposed outdoor storage in the B3 district should be limited as an accessory use in order to preserve the B3 district's land base for appropriate commercial uses. In order to protect the aesthetic integrity of the properties to be used for outdoor storage, as well as the appeal of neighboring properties, outdoor storage lots will be required to have screening along property lines and right-of-way, which may include natural vegetation or fencing in combination with landscaping. To further prevent negative impacts for neighboring properties, a major site plan review would be required for each allowed principal use of outdoor storage, and an administrative site plan review would be required for each accessory use of outdoor storage. Planning Department believes this ordinance will provide community use facilities and institutions the ability to develop storage options which require minimal infrastructure, but also protect the aesthetic integrity of neighboring properties. And for this reason, staff would appreciate your evaluation and recommendation of this ordinance to the Assembly. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the Commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Spring and then Ms. Bailey.
Yes, through the chair, staff, can you give us some examples of this, how this would apply or what the need for this is? And it's hard for me to visualize what this will result in.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, just to name a couple, for instance, the University UAA may have equipment associated with the maintenance of their properties. This would allow for them to store the property or store the equipment on site, the materials on site, and not have to build the infrastructure associated with containing those vehicles within a building.
Through the chair, like snow plows or something, then would be
through the chair, Mr. Spring, correct.
Okay, they already do that, I think, at UAA, but
they may do that, but not legally.
okay.
Ms. Bailey.
That actually is a lead into what my question was going to be. I kind of wanted some history on why this change has been being proposed. Is it because there's currently a whole bunch of these uses happening and we're trying to bring them into compliance, or is it because there's a lot of these places that are saying, hey, we need this?
Through the chair, Ms. Bailey, like Mr. Schoenthal had mentioned with regard to medical in the I-1, these are issues that the planning department has identified as problems, and it's in an effort to correct some of these issues we've had.
Thank you. And then one more question. On page 2, it mentions that a major site plan review shall be required for each allowed principal use of outdoor storage, and administrative site plan review shall be required for each. Can you just run through who would be approving each of those?
Through the chair, Ms. Bailey, a major site plan review would come back to the Commission for your review. A administrative site plan review is an internal review done by the planning department and issued without public hearing.
Kind of a follow-up. I'm trying to picture what types of things are going to come to the Commission. I don't really want anytime a park that's building like a shed to store some baseball bats to come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Can you detail what the difference is, like an example of which one would come to which body?
So through the chair, Ms. Bailey, so as a principal use, so let's just assume that we have an institution such as UAA who owns many properties, there are many properties that actually encompass the campus. If the storage or storage of vehicles was to be on a standalone lot, meaning it may be owned by the university but is actually the only use on the lot, there are no other principal uses established, then it would be a principal use which would require a major site plan. If it was accessory to an already established principal use, so meaning there was a structure, it was part of their facility on that particular property, and they were simply storing their equipment on the property along with the building, it would be an accessory use and would go through an administrative site plan review.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Mr. Strike.
Thank you, and through the chair. I note on the page 2 of 2 that the aesthetic integrity of the properties have to be maintained, and that you have screening and natural vegetation or fencing in combination with landscaping as a requirement. So are you saying that UAA, now that we're bringing them into compliance, will have to now fence, screen, or otherwise protect the aesthetic view of that property?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, we recognize the potential impacts that these storage yards could have on neighboring properties. And so, as such, we have recommended that landscaping, either in its natural form or installed landscaping in combination with a fence, be installed along all properties and rights of way.
Okay. Let's take a look at the property that's adjacent to the planning offices, where you have the bus laydown yard. I believe this fits as one of those pieces of property that you're trying to bring into compliance. Now, there is a fence there now, but from an aesthetic standpoint, it's not the appropriate, probably, fencing that you're envisioned here. Are you now telling the city that they're now going to have to put vegetation or other type of screening in place on that lot?
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, if that use is in fact legal at this point in time, it would essentially be grandfathered, and they would not have to adhere to the landscaping requirements as dictated by this ordinance. Any new storage yard or storage of vehicles associated with that community use would be required to provide the landscaping.
I don't see any grandfather clause provisions in this ordinance.
Well, through the chair, Mr. Strike, the grandfather clause is actually determined by Chapter 12, and they don't need to be specific to this ordinance. They actually govern non-conforming uses. And so I think it would be pertinent to this particular ordinance that if it was legal at the time that the use was established, and by virtue of adoption of this ordinance made it illegal, it would be then grandfathered.
Is that what happened?
Well, I can't tell you if the use on the property at this point in time without further evaluation is in fact legal, but I'm saying if it was legal, then it would be grandfathered with regard to landscaping.
So back to Ms. Bailey's original question, we're not fixing a situation that's occurred in the past to make it legal, because they're already legal by virtue of grandfathering. We are now moving forward to capture all new. You see where I'm going with this? So I'm
through the chair,
fail to
Mr.
see
Strike.
why this then before us. Why are we considering this?
I see where you're going with it, and I agree to a certain extent. However, this will fix other issues that have been identified within the municipality.
Okay, so that's back to Ms. Bailey's original question. What issues will that fix?
It will fix. I mean, if you want me, do you want me to give you examples?
We just need one, but the example you gave was UAA, which now I'm hearing isn't needing to be fixed because they are grandfathered.
We don't know.
If you'd like, sure.
Through the chair to Commissioner Strike, the UAA is actually quite a good example of it, and the issue is that in any given, for example, on the PLI lands or even on parks lands, there's frequently multiple parcels that are associated with those properties. So, for example, it may look as though it's a parcel is located within an overall park, but storage on that parcel is unacceptable under those circumstances if it's all by itself, because it's not an allowed principal use. So, as an example, UAA right now in fact, spent $1 million virtually identifying or getting the flood hazard permits near Providence on the other side of Providence Drive. That was a laydown yard. They've identified that as quite a good site for storage of a lot of materials on their campus that the campus uses, but it's an isolated site. It's not it can only work if it's a principal site. It's well screened. Actually, most people wouldn't even identify it because it's well screened from Piper. It's well screened from almost all sides. But the fact remains that for this to go forward now, that's a B3 site. UAA would rezone this to a PLI so that it would be consistent with the rest of the campus, but it would then allow them to use this as a storage area where it doesn't impact actually the rest of the campus, where it's actually a place that doesn't impact neighbors. It goes a long way toward really creating a much better situation.
Where I'm really coming from here is I like the fact that we're correcting something that was done incorrectly for whatever reason in the past. What I'm concerned about with budget constraints, they are, especially against the university and other municipality and departments and so forth, I just want to be assured that we're not creating any unintended consequences that might create a budget issue, a cost issue against any of these areas, any of these facilities.
Through the chair to Commissioner Strike, once again, in cases as staff David Whitfield suggested, the areas, if they are legal now, and in fact the bus barn has been there for many, many years, it is covered under Chapter 12 of Title 21 in the grandfather clauses. But the real part of the issue is, and I would say it's kind of twofold, in that the provisions that we've identified with landscaping and with screening are completely consistent with all of with the existing requirements for storage throughout Title 21 as it currently exists. So they're completely parallel with the existing conditions that are in there. And the second piece of that then is there may be cases where it'll continue on in the case it is now, just as we have parking lots all over town that don't have landscaping. But we do capture, for the better, new circumstances around town as they develop.
In new situations I can get behind. I just want to make sure that we're not creating that unintended consequence against a surprise, surprise, surprise. And oh, by the way, these three property owners now are hit with a new requirement to screen, fence, vegetate, etc., that they didn't have before that they may now have. Because this could add up on an industrial I-1 land around the four perimeters. You could be looking at tens of thousands of dollars.
Mr. Whitfield.
Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, just to kind of piggyback on your comment there, I think the intent behind this ordinance is to not create, or actually to correct a lot of those things, to stop the, or I should say, reduce the investment costs of building the infrastructure associated with storing these vehicles or equipment. So,
on existing sites, not moving forward. This moving
on
forward,
existing and
there's new requirements.
Yes.
Well, last question. If you're grandfathered from the conditions, but you didn't previously, you weren't even an allowed use, how does that grandfather you? Am I missing something?
Mr. Chair, you have to be conforming before you can be legally non-conforming. So that's to say you have to be legal before you can be legal.
Hang on a minute. I want to write that one down.
So it is absolutely the truth. It's in Chapter 12. If you're not legal when you establish the use, then you cannot be legally non-conforming. If you follow me there, I mean,
Right, so
I
you're
understand
saying in the old code these were allowed uses, and in the new code they're
correct. Not. So as long as it was a legal use under the old code or at the time that the use was established, and by virtue of this adoption,
gotcha,
made it illegal, it would be legally non-conforming.
Wunderbar. All right. At this point, I'd like to open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to testify? It's actually a condition of your grade that you come forward and testify here this evening. Serious. I'm not going to sign it unless you come forward. No? All right. Anyone wishing to testify? Last call. Anyone at all? Hearing none, the public hearing is closed. What's the will of the body? Mr. Walker.
In the case of 2016-0128, I move to approve the application as submitted by the staff.
Thank you. Can I get a second? Thank you, Ms. Barker. Would you wish to speak to your motion, Mr. Walker?
No.
Okay, Ms. Bailey.
I just want to commend the staff for doing these last couple things, some good housekeeping. I think it does a good balance of being fair to the current users who may have had intended consequences upon them, and then also preventing problems that could arise in the future. So while it may seem like we're making it so that nothing's happening, it's actually preventing future problems from coming up down the line.
Ms. Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be supporting the motion, and I would just like to underscore the thanks to the staff for their work in being proactive about bringing forward to us what are essentially technical amendments so that we can save time for the public, for the petitioner, for property owners, and the commission and assembly later on down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. Mr. Walker owes both you and Ms. Bailey a cup of coffee, I think. With that, please vote. That proposed recommendation of the Assembly is approved. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Mr. Walker, seconded by Ms. Bailey. We are adjourned.